Get started with the meeting. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, October 25th meeting of the Green Bay Planning Commission. Starting with a roll call. Chair Lisa Hanson, present. Vice Chair Jacob Miller.
Present.
Alder Veronica Corpus-Dax. I see her there.
She is here.
She's there. I see her there.
She's just muted, yes.
Right. That's fine. All right. So Alder Corpus-Dax is here. Commissioner Sidney Bremer.
Present.
Commissioner Darius Daniels.
Present.
Minsmeyer.
Present.
And Commissioner Ken Ravinsky.
Present.
Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Approval of the agenda for the October 25th, 2021 meeting of the Green Bay Plan Commission.
I move approval.
Second.
Second.
So motion by Commissioner Bremer, second by Alder Corpus-Dax. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to the approval of the minutes from the September 27th, 2021 meeting of the Green Bay Plan Commission.
So moved. Motion approved. Okay.
All right, I don't know who got that second. I got a motion by Alder Corpus-Dax and second by Commissioner Ravinsky. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, moving on to regular business, starting with a public hearing. This public hearing has been properly posted and public notification has been published in the Green Bay Press Gazette. The Plan Commission is interested in hearing public comments on agenda items. We invite your comments and ask that after your name has been called, you state your address, whether you represent a group or association, whether you favor, oppose, or are only providing information in this matter, and your comments or concerns. We also ask that you confine your testimony to facts related to the proposal at hand, avoid repetitive testimony. You must be recognized by the Plan Commission in order to speak, and please address your comments to the chair. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. So we will now open the public hearing on item 1, public hearing on a request to create a planned unit development to permit temporary uses at 216 South Military Avenue, submitted by David and Edward Martin, Martin Newfield LLC property owners.
Madam Chair, I can give a brief overview, if you don't mind, of the site. This request is for the creation of a planned unit development, or PUD, at 216 South Military Avenue. I've got this up on the screen here, the property outlined in red. It's one tax parcel. It's about 8.3 acres in size. It is between Shawano and Western Avenue on the west side of South Military, on the west side of Green Bay. This site is the former Shopko site, as well as a Sherway grocery store back in the day, liquor store up on the northern end of the property. Being along military corridor with commercial zoning on either side, there is residence to the west along Randall Court that are comprised of single, two families, and multifamily uses. Looking at the future land uses, the red indicates commercial land uses. So obviously this is a commercial corridor. A lot of the zoning will match up with that as well. Where we can see here, this current zoning does a community center commercial, or C3 zoning, which would have been fitting for the former Shopko and grocery store at one point. This request is for the creation of the PUD to create some limited term, kind of light industrial type uses. Neil will provide more detailing and the developer's agreement in the action item.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. And so now we are looking for interested parties who are looking to speak in favor of the item. And if you are calling in on internet mode, Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this item?
Trying to do there.
Sir, if you could state your name and address, and you can certainly voice any comments or concerns, but we
Sorry.
can't question time.
Okay, I'm Michael Gretzinger from 134 Perkins Avenue, and I'm new to this Zoom thing, so you have to excuse me if I do it wrong.
You're fine.
But they say like light industrial. I'm just wondering what type of light industrial. You know, it could be anything from an incinerator to, I mean, light commercial or whatever. It'd be nice to know what their plans were.
Did you have any other concerns or comments, sir?
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this item? Is there anyone wishing to provide information only? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Is there anyone wishing to speak?
Yeah, this is Attorney Ryan Crumry. I represent the Martin family and Feld Enterprises. The temporary uses we are looking to approve are spelled out in the development agreement, and I think Neil could go into more detail for the committee as to what those are. But really, it's some temporary warehousing uses, as well as some very, very light industrial as far as some medical use, medical equipment that's going to be refurbished at the site. So those are the uses. We're working with Neil on a development agreement right now.
And if you could just state your address for the record too, please.
Sure, Ryan Crumry, 4432 Indian Trail, Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Let the record reflect that no one has come forward, and this public hearing is now closed. Moving on to the corresponding actionable item, item number 2, consideration with possible action on a request to create a planned unit development to permit temporary uses at 216 South Military Avenue, submitted by David and Edward Martin, Martin Neufeld LLC property owners.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and take this one. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to present this to you this evening. A little bit more of a complex situation than other ones we've probably dealt with. So I'll try to kind of go through, and I'm going to try to cover most of the highlights in the staff report. Certainly not going to just simply read through that, but then we'll kind of obviously identify the preliminary planning staff recommendation, and then also my recommendation immediately after that, so that the commission obviously can kind of understand the process of how we got to where we are on this one. I certainly don't want to present this as me not agreeing with staff, because actually I'll be the first one to admit that from a technical standpoint, I believe staff's comments were right on the mark in terms of appropriateness with the current zoning ordinance and the land use plan. However, their job is to certainly to review that within the context of those two measurement sticks. So that's in terms of how they will evaluate the project. We've been working with the Martins in terms of evaluating a couple different potential reuse sites, reuses of the overall site going forward. So that's why we are looking at the possibility of entertaining some temporary uses on the site, if it's understood that it would be done in the overall context of the eventual redevelopment of the site on a fixed time frame. So this is a little unusual in terms of that. Certainly, as we looked at it, I think Paul did a great job of laying out certainly the adjacent uses. Actually, there is some industrial zoning immediately next to the site. But again, so overall, the land use still has remained largely commercial. The comprehensive plan does designate this property as commercial at its current level. So again, we've talked about the specific size of the site, about an 8-acre site. The other item that I think that Paul didn't mention that I want to point out is there's railroad tracks immediately on the southern part of the site. That is an active rail line that is right there. So we're looking at in terms of identifying kind of a temporary plan unit development to allow some of the specific uses. And I think obviously Attorney Crummy did a good job of identifying specifically what we're looking at. And I think the plan unit development, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, does specifically identify very specifically those uses that will be allowed. It's not just a general industrial use. It is designated to those uses as were described by Attorney Crumry. So we want to look and make sure that we are being very specific on that. So not leaving a wide open type of use. We are suggesting a 3-year window on that. I think the developer has requested 5 years. The compromise we are proposing on that would be a 3-year window for that, with the possibility to come and request an extension if they are showing active uses towards the pretty much the active redevelopment of the site. So showing some progress. With the one main metric we are looking at in terms of the development agreement would be the requirement of a concept plan for the redevelopment of the site that would need to be brought forward to this body and to City Council within that 3-year time frame. Again, Paul did a good job, I think, laying out kind of the PUD zoning effects. Again, if it was on itself in terms of a permanent PUD zoning, there are a couple areas I think that we would have some concerns in terms of its whether it would match our own ordinances on its own and in a vacuum by itself. However, because we are knowing that there's at least one active redevelopment potential on this site, including one that staff has worked with very specifically. We are requesting that the Plan Commission consider this as a temporary use, basically conditional upon the entering into a development agreement that kind of guarantees the timing on top of this particular temporary use. So rather than just award a temporary use through the zoning process, staff is recommending this plus a development agreement to kind of make sure and ensure that time frame is adhered to. There is the possibility to extend that, as I mentioned, up to an additional 2 years if there is sufficient progress shown towards the redevelopment of the site. Again, we're confident at this point. Looks like things are going actually pretty well with at least one particular prospect. We think that's going to hopefully be much faster than that time frame. So, but again, at this point, we don't know until there is actually an agreement done and completed with that. So again, I want to make clear that the development agreement does not replace the PUD zoning. That is very specifically an action and an authority that needs to come through this particular body and City Council. So any adjustments or changes and approvals that certainly need to come through the Plan Commission and City Council. The development agreement essentially is something that has been presented to our redevelopment authority. And essentially is in exchange for considering, recommending an approval to this body for that use in exchange for the development and some sort of commitment towards the eventual redevelopment of the site, which is certainly the redevelopment's primary interest. The authority, the RDA's primary interest in this site would be the eventual redevelopment of the site. So with that, I think we can look through here. So the recommendation certainly that I'm recommending is the creation of a temporary PUD ordinance for a 3-year period. That's basically conditioned upon the entering into a development agreement with the developer, kind of verifying and further solidifying their intentions to redevelop the site. And with that, certainly be able to answer any questions. And I obviously know the applicant is here as well. So.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Bremer. You got to take yourself off mute.
Thank you, Director. That's okay. Did I do a little better this time than last?
I always know who you mean, Sid, that you're fine.
I'm glad. Thank you. And Neil will do. In any event, I'm curious as to who would be preparing the formal redevelopment proposal.
The plans that would be the developer would be responsible for bringing that forward. So that would be certainly the property owner. That could be the property owner himself or an additional developer coming in to do the site. In either case, I think the Martins would need to sign off on that development strategy that would come forward. That's our current intent anyway.
Okay, my reason for asking that is what kind of authority will the city have to insist upon having that formal proposal? And I ask because they're going to have some facts on the ground there as far as the temporary uses, should we go forward with this, that have been proposed. Had I moved a whole bunch of flooring into a building, I wouldn't be real eager to move it back out again.
Yeah, I think that's certainly their concern as well. It's obviously we are certainly having, it's up to the developer in terms of doing that. Our discussions with the Martins to point have been pretty clear that, while there's certainly the immediate interest was this temporary use, the redevelopment potential that has kind of been discussed with them over time, I'm certainly taking them at their word and have good reason to believe that they are actively pursuing the redevelopment of the site. They have certainly a financial interest in doing so. If they can find a partner to come in and actually look at the concept that's being considered as part of the redevelopment, the development agreement is essentially a building that would actually be constructed between the existing Shopko building and Military Avenue, so would effectively screen a significant portion of the building. So it's just, those details certainly need to be worked out, and the site plan would still need to come through this body, certainly for further review and comment as a project. So we are relying on the developers' intentions and what they have said at this point. Again, that was certainly their concern. I think in trying to push the time frame out to 5 years, I think they were probably thinking somewhere along the same lines, Commissioner. So we compromised at 3 with the ability to extend for 2 years if they have continued to show that they have entertained proposals and continued to work with staff and actually developed this redevelopment concept, which we think they can certainly do within 3 years, even if they don't have a solid redevelopment project ready to come forward by that point. But we're fairly confident at this point that does look like that's probably likely to happen sooner rather than later. There's a lot of ifs that still need to be worked out, and certainly that's going to be up to the developer and certainly any prospect partner they work with. But it is agreed that is certainly a concern over making too many improvements to that structure. And certainly on a temporary basis, there's certainly nothing to prevent the applicant from coming in and requesting that be extended or that be permanent. But that will certainly be up to the city to essentially to stick to our guns or not, depending on the direction of this body and the city council when the time is appropriate.
Okay, and it would be at that point that we would be concerned with whether or not the formal proposal fit the comprehensive plan, which the report note this does not.
Yeah, I think that part of that redevelopment plan and that concept plan would probably involve whether or not an amendment to the comprehensive plan would actually be required as part of the formal approval. But until we actually have a development concept in front of us, they certainly did not feel that was a required change at this current time.
Thank you very much.
I had a question. Looking, there was a draft of the development agreement. Is that the draft ordinance I see, or is that something separate?
I think what's attached to your packet is the draft ordinance, if I'm not correct, Mr. Newmeyer. If that's what it is, I believe.
Should be a draft copy of the PUD, yes.
Okay, my question on that is, what does the city have a vested interest in the redevelopment of the site? Like, is there, I guess that's not really our role here, but I guess typically development agreements I've seen in the past are when the city has money in the site or going towards the site. But if that's not, if there's not actually any development happening yet, without seeing what that development agreement looks like, it seems just unknown, I guess.
No, and that's an excellent question, Ken. And this will be the first one. A majority of the agreements that we would put forward are generally TIF related. So there's a direct financial interest that would be involved. In this one, it is simply kind of reaffirming the temporary nature of what is being discussed here, and that both parties are kind of agreeing that this site is essentially needs to be redeveloped. Is kind of what we're looking at. It's the intention of both parties is to see this site redeveloped, and I think the reason why we kind of felt it was important to put it in the form of a development agreement specifically was that certainly this is not something we wish to see. This type of request, we don't wish to see this come forward on other vacant buildings throughout the city, regardless of size, large format, or all the way down to smaller ones, saying, well, I've got a vacant building, so I just want to store stuff in it now, regardless of the land use. We feel that if the development agreement specifically identifies that this project is being considered in the context of the eventual redevelopment of the site in a manner that's going to be consistent with the comprehensive plan one way or another, feels that kind of exempts it from that and it doesn't establish precedent for other uses. So again, it's certainly essentially going to be up to the city to enforce that. At the end of the day, it will be, the request could come down at the end of the time period or even sooner, that they could request this that they do this permanently. That is something we would have to evaluate and could come forward. It could come forward right now as it is. The applicant has been willing to work with us up to this point to kind of identify this as this being a temporary use of these vacant structures in anticipation of a greater redevelopment project occurring on the site. So while that, you hit it exactly right on the head, Commissioner, that this zoning does not really anticipate the future use of what could happen on the site, but the development agreement kind of does. So that's why we feel like handcuffing the two together is a good strategy to approach this project.
I guess another question with the site itself right now, has the owner, is the building in use currently, or is it sitting vacant right now?
Well, I'd have to defer that specifically to the applicant. For as far as, there may be some small uses in there, but in terms of, I believe the majority of the site is currently vacant, but I would have to defer to the applicant to be specific.
I had another follow-up question with that as far as is there going to be more investment in the current structure that, say 3 or 5 years from now when it comes back, the argument would be, well, we've already invested this much into this use. Well, let's just forgo the temporary use and now it is industrial. It's kind of concerning to me, allowing a temporary use for something that is clearly defined as not the use that we want there. And I'm hesitant because I see these temporary things becoming permanent and I don't want to see that.
I would say staff shares that same concern, Commissioner, and that's kind of why we were handcuffing it to that development agreement. So we do feel then there are 2 specific approvals then that would have some impact in terms of what the actual developer could do at that point. I mean, it's being pretty clear that, again, their intention is to pursue redevelopment. Our intention is to see that this stays temporary in light of that redevelopment. So again, maybe we're just kicking the can down the road at some point. I think the developer is looking at possibly doing some door access for access way storage in there, but certainly not to say that that's a minor expense, and it's easy to say when it's not my money. But in the grand scheme of, I think, redevelopment of the site, I do believe that's a relatively smaller cost. So, and that has been, I think that language has been mentioned in the development agreement. That kind of I guess prohibits or does substantial improvements or changes to the building that would prevent that from going forward. So.
Go ahead, Commissioner Rep.
Since I share Ken's concern, I do need to note that it's problematic for us to vote on one half of the handcuff. So the PUD is handcuffed to the development agreement that projects what might be coming down the pike, but we have no idea what that might be. Is there any way that you can give us some indication about that?
I guess I would say, Commissioner Bremer, I said certainly the authority, obviously, of this commission lies in terms of the existing zoning specifically. And then in terms of any future zoning, this body would have, again, review of that request. I can simply say that, and I don't think the applicant is quite ready to divulge specifics on what may be coming forward on that, other than to say we do believe it is something. I believe David Buck has issued a letter to the applicant, the interested party, that would be consistent with the zoning going forward, possibly still subject to some future zoning changes to make the project fit even a little bit better. But I think it was going to be an allowable use under the existing zoning, subject to some final review. Again, we had just a very cursory site plan that's been given at this point. But again, we don't have, in terms of the exact nature of the use and final location, certainly that would certainly need to be evaluated, and would be evaluated in terms of the requested zoning. So I think this body would certainly have very clear authority on making a recommendation on that future use in light of the comprehensive plan and so forth. I guess I will end with, I'll answer it by saying this, Commissioner, that if we didn't feel it was going to be a good use that was being proposed, staff would not be bringing this forward to you right now. And hopefully that we would see something from the applicant, maybe even as soon as within the next 3 to 6 months.
So you're advising us to set our own authority ascend upon the state.
Certainly based on the existing use and especially the temporary nature of it. So again, evaluating the use as is being requested and kind of agreeing with staff that this only needs to be can only be a temporary use and not a permanent use. I think for purposes of this discussion, that is the critical component on this. We are doing it in terms of the greater redevelopment of the site is the reason why we want to consider that. And hopefully that information will be forthcoming here soon.
I guess another question I have is, would this site not redevelop without this temporary use being put in place?
I think, Commissioner, I guess I would go the other way with it, that I think it's more likely that this temporary use would be requested to be a permanent use if there wasn't some effort to kind of facilitate the redevelopment of the site. I think there'd be more of a concern that this would be, again, especially with the existing industrial zoning already in the area, and there would be some challenges, I think, to looking at it that way. Again, what is the future involvement with the city? Is there likely, this isn't a TIF district, there's probably likely to be some sort of financial ask for, I think, redevelopment on this site, either from the current owners or the future developer. So I think we're going to have the ability to help facilitate that. We haven't seen any other interest really at this point. I mean, I think the current owner has advertised for possible development on the outlots for other uses, and I don't believe anything else has happened at this point. So we do think that this is the best opportunity to kind of facilitate a desirable outcome for the redevelopment of the site at this point.
I guess I would still just be more inclined if the development agreement was already in place and there was already some kind of, that action inked and penned out. I'm just still real hesitant on this.
I guess to be clear on the status of that agreement, Commissioner, is that the RDA has recommended general terms essentially at this point and directed staff to prepare a final development agreement to go to City Council. We're in the process of finalizing that particular agreement. In terms of, like I said, the majority of the information in that agreement, is going to overlap considerably with what is in the planned unit development ordinance in terms of the specific uses and the timeframes, very specifically. The thing that's I guess most notable probably in that will be the definition of the concept plan and what sort of information will be required to constitute essentially them meeting that requirement of preparing that concept plan within that 3-year window. Is kind of the key differentiating factor, I think, between that document. So, and we are actually essentially asking that both documents be brought forward to City Council at the same time, and would kind of ask that the development agreement probably be reviewed first and approved first before City Council takes action on the zoning.
Was there any further discussion amongst the commission or any further questions for staff?
Yeah, at least I got a couple.
Sure.
I think this shows some real creativity to start. I know we talked a little bit about this last week, Neil, or a couple weeks ago, Neil, in terms of some of these larger old big box sitting around the city that might have to get a little creative on to find uses for. And I think this is a good example of that. I'm fairly comfortable with what I'm looking at, what I've heard here. I like that there's an end to it and some other conditions to kind of push along the redevelopment. So I'm pretty comfortable with what's there. As it sits right now, I'm sure the site is probably not active at all. If there's anything going on, this gives something going on there. It gets some jobs for people, some needed space. Some liveliness on the site certainly sounds a lot better than it just sitting there empty, even if it's not an ideal use. And I think we get a little lost sometimes looking for the most perfect ideal use of these things. And I don't think that's something that we can really focus on for these type of buildings. There's a lot of them. We're going to have to be creative if we want to find them activated. And this is a way. I appreciate Neil and everyone else that's working on this to make it, give us something here. So I like it. It's not perfect, but I love the creativity of it.
Any further discussion? Or I guess, do we want, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate that comment. I just, we're not the redevelopment authority, we're the plan commission, and there are zoning rules that are in place for a reason. So honestly, maybe the best route with this is to table it until the development agreement goes through and is approved by council. I don't like having those go through at the same time without being able to see that agreement and have that actually hard and fast set, inked and done deal. It doesn't sit right with me.
I guess, Ken, the counterpoint on it, we wouldn't normally take development agreements into account anyway. So why would we do it in this particular case? Just because I know we're trying to follow our own rules here, that on plan commission, but that's not something we would normally take into account anyway.
Fair enough. I guess with that was just me trying to extend an olive branch with that. I would even make a motion to not approve this recommendation.
Okay, do we have a second on that? Or I guess, do we want to hear from the applicant at this point too? I feel like, I don't know that there's anyone from the public that's looking to speak at this point. Go ahead, Commissioner Daniels.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, and I kind of agree with Vice Chair Miller on this. I think some use is better than the sitting idle, and I echo the same sentiments. I think if staff has done their due diligence and they have some guardrails in place, then I'm all for not having a lot of red tape and doing these type of things. And I trust that staff has done their due diligence and their recommendations. So I agree with Vice Chair Miller, and I think something is better than nothing. And if we have those guardrails in place, again, we do have to get creative and with some of these buildings. And I'm just not a fan of standing in. I'm just not a fan of having to jump through 1,000 hoops to make something happen. And I trust that Neil and staff, that they have guardrails and plans in place to prevent this from being long-term. Then I will, again, err on the side of Vice Chair Miller and say that something is better than nothing at this point. So just my 2 cents.
Madam Chair, you asked about whether we wanted to hear from the applicant, and I would like to motion that we open the floor so that we might do so. Specifically, I'd like to hear anything else about why they would be interested in having a permanent solution to this rather than the temporary uses that they put forward. I'm still worried about those facts on the ground and all of that flooring that's going to get moved from here to there.
And I just want to add this, point before I forget after we open the floor. But I will say that, I do like staff's creativity. I like that they're checking in after 3 years. I feel like, and I 100% know what Commissioner Daniels is talking about when he says, something is better than nothing, and the same with Vice Chair Miller. I think none of us feel that anything is better than nothing at any point, but with this situation, having something moving in that site, I think is a big deal, especially since Military Avenue already has an empty Sears store. They have empty big box stores in mini malls on Military too. So getting something in there and then having a redevelopment down the line, that to me is a bonus. So that was my 2 cents that I wanted to throw in there before we have a motion by Commissioner Bremer to open the floor.
Okay.
And a second by Alder Corpus Dax. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so the floor is open, and I guess if we could hear from the applicant, again, just stating your name and address for the record, and anything that you'd like to address that you've heard us have questions about.
Sure, thank you, Commission. My name is David Martin from HJ Martin. Our address is 320 South Military Avenue in Green Bay, and we've really been fortunate to have been on Military Avenue since 1959, since my grandfather moved our location from Maple Street to what it is now. And we remember, I personally don't remember, but our family does, that it used to be Highway 41 and it used to be the main attraction. And that's what we're trying to make it as. The reason why we bought the building is we perform retail construction all over the country. So we have relationships with retailers, developers, brokers, and a lot of people just know us as a small flooring store, which is great because we want to be known as that to the area. But if you look at the surrounding area, not only HJ Martin on Military, but the former Shopko property, the family and company own about 40 acres between all properties. So if you look at the old Cub Foods building, we turned that into a long-term lease with Burlington and Michaels, and they developed the outlot and sold that for what is now Cellcom in North Shore Bank. If you look at the old Toys R Us building, you'll see Planet Fitness relocated, and not like we like to take one tenant from Green Bay and leave it vacant for the city. It's now going to be a Harbor Freight Tools, which we're excited about. We have 2 developments on the outlots above Planet Fitness that'll be waiting. You'll probably be hearing something from us. So we don't like to sit idle. I could go on and on. The old Chrysler building is now Bay Area Diamond in the back. We use it for our floor care. What the Shopko building will allow HJ Martin to do, which we have 1,200 families throughout the country, is one, we're in a COVID situation. So we have to bring in material much farther in advance to make sure we hit our deadlines with our general contractors and owners. We used a space similar to the Shopko building on Wabi Lane, 905 Wabi Lane. Look at that time frame. We're hoping what is developing there, which you will hear something shortly about, and some of you see some of the demolition going on there. That is the same philosophy as what we want to do here with the Military Avenue corridor. So we do not want to see now 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but we need time to do that. So what this would allow us is that 3-year extension with 2 1-year extensions for a total of 5. If we can have a development agreement with what Neil and his team have put together and that we have to abide by. We have with 10 permanent jobs, that is the reason why, which prompted this whole discussion, to take 30,000 square feet of the building. So what, if you allow this to happen, that will happen for a short-term lease. We do training around the country where we bring in our carpenters here. So our mistakes are in a training facility versus in your house or on your job site. So you'd be helping develop workforce. And then storage, like I talked about with COVID. Our track record, it has been successful, thankfully, because of the help from the city, and then also all of our relationships and the men and women we have working that allow us to do these types of development. But we do not like to see vacancies or anything which has been happening to big box retail. And so we like to get in front of it. The 3-year agreement allows us to do this. We have our commitment that we're going to work night and day to get this developed, but we need time to do that. And this 3-year agreement would allow that. So although we understand there's hesitancies, we hope all those examples I gave lead you to believe that we're the right team to make the Shopko property what it should be in its state.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Martin. Commissioner Bremer, does that clear up what you wanted to know, or do you have further questions?
That was very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
I guess as long as we have the floor open, is there anyone else from the public that's wishing to speak on this item? Okay. Did anyone from the commission have any further questions for the applicant? I guess hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the floor.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bremer, second by Vice Chair Miller. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so I believe at this point, we do have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Ravinsky to deny the request. Do we have a second for that motion? Okay, so without a second, that motion dies? Okay. Do we have another motion?
I would, nope, go ahead, Veronica. You were in there first, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve. I support this after hearing from staff and from the director and as well from Mr. Martin. I'm more comfortable now with what's being proposed. I like that within the agreement, there's a strong push for redevelopment and not necessarily continue on with what is being proposed temporarily. So I'm gonna go ahead and support this and make the motion to approve.
I will second, and I think a reason that I'm comfortable with this is even in a worst case scenario, we get to revisit this in 3 years. And the worst case scenario isn't that bad. It's worst case, it's used as warehousing, which is also a dire need for companies, and it helps the Martins out in that. They also seem very invested in making this happen and have a good track record. So I'm comfortable and happy to second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Bremer and a second by Vice Chair Miller. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Motion was by Alder Corpus Dax.
I'm sorry. A motion by Alder Corpus Dax and a second by Vice Chair Miller. Do we have any further discussion?
We'll be supporting the motion because I do feel a higher level of comfort, thanks to comments by Mr. Martin.
Okay, then we will go ahead with a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, so we have 6 approved, 1 opposed, and that will be moving on to City Council. The next City Council meeting is?
I believe is November 9th.
November 9th. Okay, thank you.
The second.
Oh, it's November 2nd. Sorry, that's right.
Sorry. All right, so moving on to City Council for November 2nd. All right, and then moving on to item number 3, public hearing on a request to repeal and recreate development along the 2300 and 2400 block of East Mason Street for East Town Mall, submitted by Department of Community Development. So with this public hearing, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead with that brief overview.
Thank you. So this is for Easttown Mall, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with the location, near the intersections of Main and Mason Street on the city's east side. The original PUD was created in 1979, so we're doing this as a staff update, not only to clean up the language and to provide some clarity throughout the entire campus, but to also bring about the creation for this PUD, which we'll get into during the actionable item. But generally, we're just repealing the original document, all 11 amendments, and then the new PUD, which was attached in your packet, will have the coverage of pretty much everything that the other ones were missing and then some.
Thank you so much, Steph. So now with the public hearing, we're looking for people who wish to speak that are in favor of the item. And again, if you're on internet audio, it is *6 to unmute yourself and then state your name and address for the record. Looking for interested parties who are looking to oppose this item. Looking for parties who are providing information only. Is there anyone wishing to speak? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Let the record reflect that no one came forward, and this public hearing is now closed. Moving on to the corresponding actionable item, item number 4, consideration with possible action on a request to repeal and recreate a planned unit development along the 2300-2400 block of East Mason Street for Easttown Mall, submitted by the Department of Community Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a brief location map. Again, I'm sure everyone's very, very familiar with this campus. There are some big box retailers here, and then some previous what were called fringe lots along East Mason Street that are parcels onto themselves. For the general zoning right now, everything is under a PUD. So this kind of looks like chaos, but it doesn't actually exist. Everything's been under a PUD since 1979. However, for the future land use, everything is slotted for commercial. So that's kind of how we use what we used for the base in creating this new PUD. A couple things to tee up with the exhibits and what we're going to show. There are going to be not only a presentation of why we're repealing, what the new PUD is, but then also some amendments that I'm making during this meeting after talking to some of the owners once the PUD draft was sent out. We also had some tech issues with our mapping. This X here represents one parcel that was recently created, but the mapping is showing it as right-of-way, which is obviously just a technical glitch. So we weren't able to add it into our boundary map, but it is part of the boundary, and the parcel number needs to be added into the text once it's formally by the county. So this will require a condition, which I have at the end. This parcel here was not added onto the map, but it is listed in our text in the PUD. So this is where one of the pylon signs is located. So this is generally the boundary map, but this parcel needs to be added here. This one will be added once it's formally created. So I'm sorry if that looks a little confusing on some of the exhibits. For just some basic background, so that existing PUD, again, very old and has a lot of amendments. Almost all of them were signage amendments. Initially, they were kind of tracking the changes as they went. That kind of went out the window over the years, and people were just like adding things as they needed to add them when new tenants were put in. So there was some conflicting information. It didn't really have any base zoning. So a lot of the PUDs we create now have, it's a C3 base with these amendments, or it has some other sort of zoning district base. The previous PUD did not have that. So this is really just a very large cleanup item that we've needed to do for a while. So that way there's some consistency throughout the entire Easttown campus on what the base zoning is, what we should be looking for, and what are the exemptions under that PUD. The major change is going to be the allowance of in-lots. So this Exhibit C, the semi-public roads. If you've ever been up to the Easttown campus, once you turn onto this, you still kind of feel like you're on a road. For reference, the Kohl's building is right here. So this road right here is actually on private development, but it goes from East Mason all the way to Auto Plaza Way. The same can be said with this road here that's outlined in red. It goes all the way around the entire Easttown campus. It feels fairly public when you're driving on it because it gives you accessibility to a lot of the buildings and then to the main mall structure. However, it is a private roadway right now. So an in-lot has not been seen within the city of Green Bay. They are prohibited from our subdivision code. However, we find that they may be appropriate in this location, this existing semi-public road, system. So what we've outlined in red here, what would be those semi-public roads. So as they're laid out here, this would give people semi-public access to different lots. So the in-lot creation would allow for a lot that does not have public frontage, but it can have semi-public frontage. So every lot would have to front onto a portion of this red roadway. This is only practicable if that red roadway is established via a permanent cross-access easement that is open to the public and that's open to adjacent parcels. So that's how we have it written into the PUD, that there needs to be a recorded permanent cross-access easement. One step of that language that I did not add during the initial drafting that I have as a condition towards the end of the report is that the city must party to that easement. So that would be know if any changes occur. There is some current ownership arrangement that they have some sort of an easement document that's been drafted, but the city's not a party to that. And it also doesn't have any maintenance requirements, dimensional information. So we don't find that that's a fitting document for us to have as a recorded document for this. We would like a separate permanent easement that we're a party to, so that way we can have not necessarily control over it, but so that way we know if there are any changes made to it. So everyone's got free ability to review those changes as they occur. Let's see, for those semi-public roads, we have written in there that they have to be at a minimum 50 feet and no wider than 70 feet width. This would be in case we ever wanted to pick those up as city roads. Usually when we do any sort of private drives, we want to make sure that they're at least built to a standard specification. So if it were to become a city road, that we could take it on and bring it up to our code as well. And then we also have that this PUD would become void if the semi-public roads are not recorded within 12 months of the PUD execution. Most PUDs have the expiration date of 12 months, so this isn't unusual. But we think it's important that because we're redoing this PUD for a variety of reasons, but this type of access is very rare. And the creation of in-lots, I wouldn't normally think that they're a great idea, but here there's just so much parking space and there's so much accessibility that already feels public. It's pretty easy to cover through the PUD. So we want to make sure that that recorded easement is established, or else we're going to revoke this PUD and then the old ones will go back into its place. Another major portion of this PUD is all the signage. So this is really for the entire campus. It designates what can happen for anything that's a parcel. So these old fringe lots, these have the same type of signage requirements. And then there are the existing pylon signs, which are these stars here, numbered. Those are existing signs, and then they have some criteria within which each of those could be. Something that I'm adding via condition that was brought to my attention is this area here. So there was a shorter monument sign that just read Easttown Mall. That has been removed, and this is being proposed there. So it's not quite a pylon. It would be less than, I think, 12 feet in total height. So I would like to add some language to allow this as well. So it's a directory, so it would be a monument directory sign instead of a pylon directory sign. So that would be the amendment that we're adding to this location. Also to note that this one right here is the closest to all the residential properties that exist on the east side of this boundary. And this would not be allowed to have any electric variable messaging signage. All of the rest of the signs would have that as an allowance, but this one would not because it's too close to the residentially zoned property. Let's see. I'm also requesting the removal of the word masonry from sections, let's see where that is, E2, sections C3 through C6, only because these signs have been updated and they don't really have brick monuments anymore. A lot of them are made out of different materials. Having masonry columns is very expensive, and that isn't what exists anymore. So that was just an oversight on my part from the last PUD, keeping that language in. So I have that listed as a condition as well. Pretty much everything else for the PUD is based on C3 zoning. So there are very few amendments to that, and they were mostly called out throughout this presentation. Something else that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that there is that residential property boundary on the east and south side. So throughout here, this is all residential. It's zoned residential and has residential uses. We have another portion of the PUD read that if any development occurs within 100 feet of this boundary, that they must install a 25-foot landscape area. This was in the previous PUD. It's been maybe partially installed, maybe not. I know that there's been a lot of discussions with our inspection department based on that. So we wanted to make sure that that language was retained in case any new development does occur in this area, that they are held responsible for that landscaped area. So that way there's an additional buffer aside from the regular buffer from our C3 area, that there would be the 25-foot landscape berm as well. So with that, we are recommending approval based on that draft PUD, and then this language here. Some of it is just to direct staff to add and update based on the exhibits and the language discussed. And I think that that was it. We notified Alder Gerlach and property owners within 200 feet. I also emailed all of the owners that I get email addresses for a copy of the PUD for the Easttown campus specifically. I haven't heard back from more than 2. So I'm not sure that they have any additional comments on here. I know that there are a couple owners on the call today, so they might have more to say. But aside from that, I only received one general inquiry, and that was from Alder Gerlach, just wanting some clarification on in-lots. So that is all I have for you. Sorry for the very long explanation for a very old PUD.
No, it was a lot of information. It seems like there was a lot of work. I guess those roadways, that's pretty important, not having that. I wouldn't even think about a site that big being like that, but yeah. All right, so was there any discussion amongst the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner Bremer.
Just a very brief question, Stephanie, and I do appreciate the additions that you made, particularly for the monument sign at the main entrance. What are the little loop-de-loops on the maps? I think it's Exhibit B that shows them clearly.
Let me look back up. All of these lines here?
The pink ones, bright pink ones.
I don't see any pink lines on my map.
Well, try Exhibit A then. I'm still looking for them. Keep going back. Sorry. Well, they show right here a little bit there. Now they do come up. I'm talking about the ones along the southern boundary that interrupt the left-hand, the second from the left major segment, and the third from the left major segment, and then
Like
go
these here?
up and yes, those, yes.
The slope is right on my screen. No wonder I was so confused. So when we make our boundary maps, we select each parcel within whatever our area is. So all of these were different parcels. So like the boundary for this is just showing like 200 feet from that one. So we just do the outside boundary for the whole thing, but it's much easier for us just to select a parcel. So these were just boundary lines from 200 feet from some of the internal parcel lines.
Thank you. That's
Sorry,
very
this is a mess. This map is very messy, especially because none of the zoning actually exists too. So, yikes.
I appreciate that. Thanks. And this is all about cleaning up messes, paper messes, that is, in particular, so we can clean up some of the on-site messes.
Was there any further questions for Stephanie? Or further discussion on this item?
Maybe not a question, but besides just being a much cleaner, easier to work through document, I assume this is also going to be a lot easier for developers to come in and understand what they can and can't do, and hopefully make that process a lot easier.
I don't know if you could see Garrett cheering from your screen. Right now, the existing PUDs don't really have any zoning direction or use direction. Last year, we did the one for the partial industrial use off the back of one of the buildings, and that was the only one that called out any particular use. From there, our inspection team and our zoning administrator have just been going probably C3, maybe C1. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of direction. So this makes it much cleaner for people who to just come in and like consume what the campus is supposed to be.
Excellent. Great work.
So now I see that we've got Mr. Bader here, and it looks like probably someone from Culver's as well. Do we need to open the floor, or are they just listening in and they're happy with what's going on and excited to have roads? We're all good with roads?
We can open it up and just see if they quick have anything. So motion to open the floor.
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Miller, second by Commissioner Bremer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, was there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Garrett Bader, 300 North Van Buren Street. Stephanie nailed everything on the head. This is cleaning up 40 years of an old shopping mall, and not just 40 years of things that maybe should have been done differently at the beginning, but how life and shopping has evolved since then. Everything Stephanie's done, we've had some back and forth on these, so I think most of the provisions are good. The only thing that I would request that you all do is to allow a little more discussion between staff and myself on specifically that ring road issue. And if Stephanie is willing to share her screen again to show the one exhibit that has the red lines in there for the ring road. As Stephanie said a little bit, the ring road itself is all on private lands. It provides access to all public and private interests that are along those lands. So you mentioned this culvert that's on the call, they own Panera, for instance, that's out in front, that's a fringe parcel or an out parcel. All their customers access the ring road, of course. The easement rights to that ring road and all the properties in red that Stephanie has highlighted are covered right now in the existing REA. It's called a Corrier agreement for everyone's edification. Stephanie's noted a desire by the city to have a separate easement agreement. I do appreciate that. However, note that yours truly does not own all the pieces along there to even grant such an easement, nor does any one owner. So respectively, the city setting itself up for a lot of needless work if it wanted separate easement agreements along those roads from all those owners. You need not only myself for the 3 properties I own, but then Kohl's, former Cub, Shopko, Aldi. It's a significant amount of work. Again, in my opinion, the Corey already affords those rights. So if the commission is so willing, I would love to have the ability to craft that language to staff's desire and hopefully have a little more discussion on that within the existing agreement. Otherwise, I think it's all good and appreciate you guys hopefully voting to approve it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And if I could get the gallery view back, please, Stephanie.
Sure.
Or whoever's in charge of it.
Yeah, it's me.
Okay, was there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this item? I guess hearing that, I'd entertain a motion to close the floor.
So moved.
So moved.
So motion by Vice Chair Miller, a second by Commissioner Daniels. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Then I'd like to move for approval. I'm very comfortable with the request that Mr. Bader has just made to allow him to have further conversations about the Beltline roads and figure that that is entered, whatever agreement they come to is entered into our approval as well.
I would second.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Bremer and a second by Commissioner Ravinsky. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead with a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And so then that will move forward unanimously to the next City Council meeting for November 2nd.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 5, consideration with possible action regarding the review on updates to Article 18, off-street parking, drives, and loading, Green Bay Municipal Code.
Okay, you guys get to see this again. So, but
Dave, we're setting the timer tonight.
I think this should probably be the last time, and you got both us Daves here. So hello, Mr. Hanson. I'm going to share my screen quick. Okay. So if you remember correctly, I believe altogether there were 14 amendments. And again, unless you want me to, I'm not going to go through the 12 that had no controversy whatsoever. I'll go through the last two. So those were number 6 and 7 in your summary. And I apologize, the page numbers go with the working document that we've been working on, not the actual general ordinance that's also attached. But so there were 2 items. Number 6 was really limiting any access onto arterial streets unless no other street was available. So we had kind of talked about that at length. I left it on here because we made some changes. But basically, city staff or community development staff and public works kind of got together multiple times, kind of talked this out, took the advice and recommendation of the Plan Commission meeting from last month. And we did remove one section here. We are not limiting access onto arterials. What we are doing is basically saying non-residential, mixed use, or multifamily uses shall not have access points onto residential local streets unless it's the only frontage available. Thereby, they can access those local streets. Not being limited to, the old code required them to go onto the arterial if they could, rather than the collector or the local. So this would allow them to go on the local, but they could still go on the arterial. So that was a pretty easy one that we kind of talked out last month. The bigger one was the distance of the driveways from the intersection. Now, kind of the 2 big points, I think, from Public Works, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, but was mainly a safety issue. And he was utilizing Wisconsin DOT document and calculation-based distancing requirement. Planning step, we are not engineers and we don't know safety and sight lines and distances, but we need something solid that we can work with developers on, tell them where their driveways can be, because that really affects full site planning. If you don't know where your driveways can be off the top, you can't do building placement. First thing we did is we looked at the 10 largest cities in Wisconsin and reviewed their regulations. And to tell you honestly, they were all over the board. There was one that used the same classification David was talking about, or a similar one. I think it was Federal Highway Administration. There were some that had no regulations whatsoever. So, and again, these are the 10 largest cities. So what we did is when we sat down, we kind of looked at it, and based on that downstream functional classification, which was the one table, very easily read, we took that, and that's what we would insert into the code. So it would be based on miles per hour for the roadway design. And you can kind of see the table here. You can see it in your packet as well. But it's considerably more than our 25/35 that we had. However, it does follow that DOT recommendation. So some of them get quite large. I don't know if we have any 50-mile-an-hour streets in our jurisdiction. We may. That would be the highest at 425. The lowest at a 15-mile-an-hour, which I don't think we have any, is 80 feet. Now, they sound really large, and you think our parcels aren't that wide. How is this ever going to happen? There are some safety valves, like we always have. Well, not always, but in most codes. So the first is if you can't meet that distance, your driveway just has to be the furthest from the intersection that you can get it. Obviously, you still have setbacks or transition yards, but if your lot's only 50 feet wide, you're never going to make a 155-foot driveway setback. So that would push it back to, whatever is furthest possible. Then the second safety valve we have, right now the traffic engineer can request a traffic impact analysis on any project that comes in. That's where you would hire an engineering firm to do an analysis, submit that, we'd review it, and make comments back. So that is very cumbersome. And so what we added in the code was a traffic study that could be done by the traffic engineer himself. So he can analyze the site individually and kind of work with the owners to pick the most opportune spot for that driveway. And then, of course, there's always the third safety valve, which is going to the Board of Appeals. And if you have a true hardship, the board will analyze that and can potentially make a variance to the code. And that's kind of up to their purview. I have talked with Paul, our zoning administrator, who staffs the board, and he said it is not uncommon for for Mr. Hansen to come to those meetings and kind of advise them as well. So this is sort of what we came up with the compromise. I mean, obviously, it can always be amended in the future if we find it has a lot of issues. But we're pretty confident with those safety valves that this will work. Really, what it's going to be most effective on is new development of greenfield sites at the major corners. So with that, we are recommending approval of all of the changes, all 14 changes as proposed, including these two tonight.
Okay, thank you, David.
Well, I'm going to see if I can stop the screen share. There we go. So, and I don't know if Dave wants to speak. We had a lot of hours of discussion, so, and research.
I appreciate staff's time that they put into this. Like, you guys, we kind of pushed you to the limits on this and really got you guys thinking. So good work on that. I feel like it's good compromises that you guys have made. It's definitely going to improve safety in our city, and I'm going to support this. I would even make a motion to approve if there are other comments, though.
Ditto and second.
All right.
Thank you so much, both Daves, for taking that on.
You're most welcome.
All right. Is there any other discussion amongst the commission? We do have a motion by Commissioner Ravinsky and a second by Commissioner Bremer to approve. All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead with a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and so then this will move forward to City Council for November 2nd. And looks like we're at informational director's report.
Evening, commissioners. Glad to be back. Staff, I don't have a written one for you tonight, but I'll just give you a verbal update. Staff continues to work on another plan unit development related to our industrial park expansion. Dave and I think a couple of their staff are working diligently on that, so hopefully bringing that forward here soon. Excited to report that we've started meeting with the prospective developer for the WPS campus site in terms of beginning to do some redevelopment planning for that particular campus. Obviously, that's probably going to be one of the most major, probably most valuable properties really available left in the city for redevelopments. We're excited to see what could come forward on that. Right now, just kind of looking at a very basic level in terms of identifying or utility connections might need to be, what sort of street grid we might want to maintain back to that site, and very preliminary. It's just I know the developer is having discussions with WPS in terms of what sort of environmental remediation will be required. So there's certainly at the very opening stages of that, but excited to be kind of going down that path and seeing that moving forward. So we're excited to see what happens there. We are proceeding with phase 1 improvements for the shipyard. We're getting ready to kind of get working with engineering to have a lot of projects be let out in terms of a lot of the waterfront improvements. So hopefully those get let here over like first part of the year, and then actually maybe see some construction along that waterfront in the shipyard here coming in late spring or summer. We're excited with that. We're still continuing to work with Merge Urban Development to move their project forward as well and coordinating the timing on those. Also working with the Department of Public Works on multiple light park improvements in the Parks Department, using some TIF funds to kind of really make some unique improvements done to that site. That could include, certainly a shelter facility, maybe some restrooms, some other types of, some other improvements and facilities on that site as well that will really make that a really great event space, obviously right on the river. We've been having some great success with some of the events here in the area. These improvements would make that even better. We're also working, the biggest expense though is actually making improvements to the like the dock wall, the actual the riverfront wall right there. That we're actually looking at making some different improvements that hopefully, if all goes according to plan, we may actually have cruise ships off the Great Lakes being able to stop and dock and come into Green Bay. So we've worked with a couple of providers. I know the Convention Visitors Bureau is working with them. So all the more reason to certainly make a welcoming spots for them to stop at Light Park. So we're excited to see if once those improvements are done, if we can actually get those to move forward. Also working with DPW on hopefully making some short-term and longer-term downtown streetscape improvements in terms of some of the areas there. We were walking down, Dave and I were earlier this year, gosh, it's probably been 2 months now, David, and probably at least. Just kind of taking a look at some of the conditions of some of the planters, some of the pavement down there. So looking at pretty rough shape in a couple spots. So looking to make some short-term improvements, maybe still yet this fall, and then make some even longer-term investments in fixing those areas up. Certainly down like the Adams Street area and some of the other areas. Looking just like they just need a little love. It's been a while since there's been some improvements made on those. So looking to try to figure out the best approach to make some short-term improvements and then a longer-term streetscape plan for those areas. RDA awarded a planning option for 1100 Walnut Street, RDA-owned property, for a multifamily project there, a nice affordable project. So they have a planning option. I think it was, I don't know, 3 months or 6 months. I can't remember how long we gave them, probably 6 months. That's our usual. So hopefully they're going to be coming forward with a project that would certainly need to come through this body once it's ready to go, but we're excited to see anything from my standpoint, anything that comes off the public ownership and onto the tax rolls is generally viewed as a good thing. So I think that's I like to be able to report that to council. And this was actually we had 3 proposals for the site. All 3 of them were actually very competitive and actually all good proposals. Good enough that we're trying to find other locations for the other 2 proposals that came through. So we're excited to see that. I think it was going to be about a 40-unit project, I think is what they were looking at on that site. So we're excited to see how that comes forward. We are working with Mr. Bader. Looks like Garrett hopped off here actually on a TIF request for some facade improvement assistance on the East Town Mall building itself. So in addition to all the other improvements he was talking about tonight, he's also trying to improve the exterior of that building. We got about a $15 million investment, and I think he's asking for about $300,000 in help to help put that on there. So on a relative, probably one of the better financial deals we would have made in terms of TIF investment if we go forward. I see Alder Corpus Stacks nodding her head. Yeah, that's definitely a good ratio compared to some of these other ones that we've seen come through. So we're confident that's probably going to move forward. I think RDA has actually approved the general terms, and we're proceeding with a full development agreement on that project. And I think that obviously just the last one I'll highlight on is staff is very much involved in the coordination of a lot of these federal and state grant programs that are coming out right now and really are all due this fall within the next month or so. So we're going to be working with the mayor's office to try to figure out and organize a whole host of different grant projects for funding everything from affordable housing to some of the park improvements, the JBS land, to other sorts of a couple downtown projects we might be looking at as well. So we're spending a lot of time really working through some of those grant programs. So hopefully, again, I think if we even get awarded even a couple of them, there's pretty substantial funds that could be coming the city's way if we are fortunate enough to be awarded a couple of those programs. So with that, that's my update for tonight. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer anyone you might have.
All right. Thank you so much, Neil. I see Commissioner Bremer nodding her head. She looks like she wants to say something, but no, not today. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your report, Neil. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
All right. And looks like then we have our PC 101 Plan Commissioner's Handbook.
Right, and I'm not going to go through anything tonight on that. It's a large document. Some of you may have seen it before, especially if you've been on the commission for a while. This is a handbook that goes with a training from the University of Wisconsin Extension Office. I think it was actually made in UW-Stevens Point. It's back from 2012. However, they do, I don't know if they've done any training since COVID. They usually have like a full day training Commissioners can go to those. City would cover the costs. To go to the training, you may have to drive yourselves or ride with one of us in the wonderful city limousine that we have, the Caravan, or the Journey, I think it is. Anyway, so if you just take a look at the first page, there's a table of contents where it talks about what's in there. There's about 7 or 8 chapters. It goes into everything. Some things that aren't related to what you would do as a city, because they're more town related. However, there's a lot of information in there, and I just threw it out there so you could download it. You can, if you want one printed, staff will print one for you and send it out. Just shoot one of us an email. But when we have small agendas, like I did last time with your rules and regulations, I'm going to grab a chunk out of there and just go over it. I think this DJ had mentioned quite a while ago the desire for some training, right? So, I mean, obviously, if there is a formal training class, we'll get that out to you, that offer out to you. But this handbook has been used, I've been planning for over 20 years, and we've always used the same handbook for training. It's really well done, and it's really big. At this time, if you have any questions, you know, as projects come up, you can always call us. But, you know, if you're wondering, is it a conflict of interest? There's a section in there on conflict of interest. There's a section in there on public participation. Anyway, I just threw it in there for that. And so when we do have a small agenda, you may see a section of that handbook. Staff will go over it. And that's that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. I'm
You're
excited. Look forward to that.
You're right.
Always look forward to everything you give us, David.
Oh, thank you.
All right. And it looks like the date of our next meeting is November 8th, 2021.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Ravinsky, second by Commissioner Bremer. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Good night,
opposed?
everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Let me know. Bye all.
Good night.